And away we go. All right, so we were up to the year 2002 when suddenly the federal government came in and took over the certified auditing branch of the CPA profession, but specifically for public companies, not for private companies. And CPAs still have jobs, they still do the work. This is only the only thing that this law we're going to learn about today, which helps stop corporate fraud. The only way that it does it is that the federal government has oversight. They don't license CPAs, and they don't teach CPAs. They have oversight and they have enforcement rights. They have enforcement rights on the CPAs who do public company audits. They have nothing to say about how we do tax returns. They don't have anything to say about how we do consultation agreements, how we do internal audits. They just have oversight. The Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a law allowing the federal government to have these powers, this oversight and enforcement of the CPA profession, only applies to public companies. All right, so we got 4 ways that Sarbanes-Oxley stops corporate fraud. And by the way, we refer to Sarbanes-Oxley. This is the law that was passed in 2002. Paul Sarbanes and somebody Oxley. That's pretty good. Well, Paul Sarbanes was from Maryland, so of course I would remember his first name, but Oxley was another senator. They're the ones that crafted the law which we still live under today, and it is lovingly known as SOX or SOX, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. All right, so how does this help stop corporate fraud or management fraud? That's really what we're talking, or financial statement fraud. How does it help? Let's see what it does. And you're going to find that the law is not only policing CPAs, but primarily, but it's helping the whole industry do its job better. Okay, so let's find out. First of all, there's something called Section 404 and certification. Section 404 certification is probably the right word to use for both expressions. And what it is that it's the concept that management must certify that they have good internal controls. Well, that sounds familiar from having been in this course so far. Segregation of duties, things like that, procedures and policies. So now management of the company must certify that they have good internal controls. Well, that doesn't sound like oversight of the CPAs. Well, hold on to your hats, and that's true. That's why I said SOX is much more than the federal government taking over control and enforcement of the CPA profession for publicly held companies. It's much more than that. What Sarbanes-Oxley, the SOX Act, said is that where does financial statement fraud start? Where does management fraud start? It starts with management. So management now has a responsibility in making sure they have good internal controls. Section 404 also says that the CPAs must come along and say, oh yeah, they do. They have to certify that those controls are there. So now the CPAs do have an additional responsibility, but it's only saying that what management says about the controls is true. Let me say that again. So what the CPAs do is they say, what management said about those controls, it's yes. Or maybe it's no. So it all depends. The CPAs come along. So it's a checks and balances system, as you can see. Management has to certify. The CPAs have to say it's a good certification. And yes, they can collude. They can still collude. But we hope that they don't. Okay, we hope that that's why there are still audit failures, perhaps, but not as much as before. All right, so that's one way. That's way number one. Number two, I'm probably going to be counting more than 4 ways. I don't know why we said 4 ways that it helps prevent corporate fraud. We're going to have more. Number 2 is the management, the executives, management, has to certify that these statements are accurate. So you might say, well, wait a minute. Isn't that the job of the CPA? It is. But guess what? Now what the Sarbanes-Oxley is doing is combating what happened when there was lots of audit failures. What happened when there was lots of audit failures is management. I think that's a good way to, let's do it. Let's do it the way the slide says. The slide calls them executives, the executives of the company, the management. So before Sarbanes-Oxley, what the executives would do is they would say, oh, the auditor said our statement was good and it's not, and there was corporate fraud under our eyes, under our noses. Well, how would we know? We're not auditors. We're not CPAs. Oh, you're saying we did it? You're saying we made the bad entry? We did. Yeah, but we're not accountants. We didn't know. We thought we were doing it right. But you hid millions of assets. Yeah, but we thought that was the way to do it. Okay, so that's what happened with Sarbanes-Oxley. No longer can the executives claim ignorance. They must certify that the statements are accurate. And by the way, very interesting, if they can't because they really don't know, then they have to hire somebody, not the CPA, but they have to hire somebody else to help them decide if it's true, and then they give it to the CPA. So it creating checks and balances in the system for the purposes of making sure we've got good financial statements. All right, with this we talked about, so this is still number one reason the Sarbanes-Oxley made managers maintain adequate internal control, and they have to certify to that effect. So they actually not only have to do it, but they got to certify that they've done it, and they sign off on it. They sign off on it. Okay. And this we also spoke about with number one, the CPA auditors, companies auditors have to attest to these internal controls that management claims are there and that they're good. Checks and balances. All right. Here's number three, reason number three. The PCAOB, who's that? Well, that was created by Sarbanes-Oxley. We're going to discuss what PCAOB is. It was PCAOB created Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley is SOX. SOX came along and created the PCAOB. All right, enough with that. Let's figure out what these initials mean. Public, well, you can probably figure out the first two. Public company. What do you think the A stands for? Auditors? Okay. We'll go for that. It might be accountants, really, but let's use the word auditor. Public company auditors oversight board. It's really, the A is really for accountants, but it's auditors is okay for us to call it that way. Public company accountants oversight board, PCAOB, and that is administered by the SEC. So this is underneath the SEC. The PCAOB is a committee, is an organization that is underneath the SEC. As you know, the SEC regulates the markets, and so this is how they're doing it. They have the Public Company Auditors or Accountants Oversight Board, and what these guys do, the PCAOB does, is they require the accounting firms who are going to do the audits of the public companies, they require them to register, they require them to make sure they're getting proper annual education so that they know what they're doing. They have to demonstrate all that to the PCAOB. And the PCAOB, this is the key. This is the real key. The PCAOB does the following. It actually tests the CPA firms. So it's called a review. They will review the CPA firms, and they're going to look at the files. They're going to look at the audit procedures. They're going to look at what are you doing? Let's take a look at one of your audits that you did. Let's kick the tires. Let's go inside. Do you do it right? Do it wrong. If you did it right, great. You get a check mark. You get an A. You go on to the next class. You graduate to grade 6, 7, get to high school, etc. If you didn't do it right and you get a bad mark, bad mark. We'll put that, the yellow greed again. We'll put that down. And now the CPA firm perhaps has to do remedial training. Maybe they have to stop doing audits for a while. That the PCAOB has that right to say no longer, you can't do any audits for 6 months or a year. They have the right to do that. And they have done that. They have made certain sanctions where they believe it's important to preserve the integrity of the market and these audited financial statements. Just as a interesting aside, there are 4. I don't want to paint them yellow, even though they might be. There are 4 what we call big CPA firms. 4 big CPA firms, and they are Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, and finally Deloitte and Touche. I think they just call it Deloitte. These are the 4. These 4 big firms do most of the big company audits out there. Now you talk about like S&P 500, the NASDAQ, or the New York Stock Exchange. These guys do most of them. They're the big ones, certainly the big companies. Right now, as far as anybody knows, and by the way, these big CPA firms are huge. They're not just a few people or 50 people or 100. They are huge. They're worldwide, because many of the companies they audit are multinational companies doing business internationally. So these are huge companies having offices all over the world. Literally, I guess, tens of thousands of CPAs on staff. The current feeling is that if this number became 3, because somebody, this is my old firm, so I'll knock them out. Somebody got too bad, too greedy. We'll put the yellow there. Got too greedy and failed too many audits, had too many audit failures, missed too many things due to maybe bad quality. 3 is, it's pretty much known we can't live that way. We can't do it. We can't get all the public company audits done. Can't do it. So there's this unwritten concept in the business world. The SEC knows about it. The PCAOB knows about it. I know about it. Just all the CPAs know that right now, based on the size of these audits and the size of our 4 accounting firms, and since they're huge, probably they can't get any larger than they can get larger, but it's hard to get much larger than they are without maybe collapsing on their own weight. It seems to be, bottom line seems to be that 3 won't do it. We just wouldn't get all the audits done. So that means, in a certain sense, that when it comes to enforcement, what is the PCAOB going to do? They're going to say if it's Ernst & Young, that's the guilty party, they're going to say, well, you have to stop doing public audits. The marketplace could collapse. Something would have to be done. There would have to be time to gear up and ramp up another way to get audits done. If Ernst & Young is suddenly not going to be able to do audits anymore, based on the number of audits they have been doing, the rest of the guys can't absorb them fast enough or quickly enough. The profession would have to readjust. It could take years to readjust to be able to replace one of the big 4. So that's kind of an interesting side. So you might say, well, how much authority and enforcement does the PCAOB have if everybody knows that? Well, that's a good point. I don't know. That's a really good point. All we know is that they do sanction, they do police and do the reviews, and probably the main thing that keeps the big 4 from getting to be too big, bad for people or firms, or keeps them from being too bad, is the fact that they can and do get sued, and so they have to buy insurance, and the insurance company makes them do their work properly, and there is some checks and balances inside the legal system doing its job, which is if you do bad work, you're going to get sued and you're going to lose a lot of money. You got to pay for what you do wrong. So the CPA firms are, by and large, doing the best they can. Mistakes still happen. Audit failures still happen. They still get sued. And that could be that one of your fraud diary entries was Ernst and Young, who just recently was sued big time, or I think even lost the suit big time for an audit failure where there was fraud involved, and EY was involved in the fraud, unfortunately. So that is how the profession is dealing with, or this is how the SOX is dealing with this whole thing. The PCAOB inspects, investigates, and enforces the auditors, and with this, perhaps this unwritten limitation, I guess you could just say they're doing the best they can do. Okay, let's pause and we'll come back.